Welcome to the Addiction Connection podcast, connecting the hope of the gospel with the heart of addiction. I'm your host, Mark Shaw, and today's topic is medication-assisted treatment, or MAT. I've talked about this several times on different podcasts, but I've never featured a podcast just on this one topic. So I wanted to go into a little more depth about this very important issue because this is going to be prominent in our culture in the days ahead. And it makes sense from a disease perspective for those who hold that addiction is a disease, which is not my view, and I don't think it's the Bible's view. But for those who believe that theory of addiction, that it's a disease, it makes sense that medication-assisted treatment would be the primary option for people who believe this is a disease, because if it's a disease, you never heal from it. You just always cope with it. You have to deal with it the rest of your life. You will die with this disease of addiction in that model. And so while you're a living person dealing with this disease, you need medication. And again, I don't agree with this, but I'm presenting that view. And if you think it's unfair, please let me know. We'd love to get email from you and comments and posts and different things. We're putting some stuff up on the blog, et cetera, et cetera. So you can make comments and let us know. But the medication-assisted treatment, MAT, is very popular. It's gaining in popularity, especially with the government. That's the way they're approaching this solution. And I don't believe it's biblical, but they do, and they think that because you have a disease, you're going to need to be on medication and be assisted with that treatment for the rest of your life. And that's consistent with their worldview, with their phenomenology, as my friend Dr. Berger talks about. So that's their view, and that's what they hold to, and I understand it, but I think you need to understand it as well. Now, the reality is the world is dealing with accidental overdose deaths. You know, in 2018, there were 67,367 accidental overdose deaths that occurred in 2018, just about 2 years ago. And the problem's only increasing. It's not getting much better. It hovers around the 70,000 lives per year lost number every year. So the deal that I'm concerned about, that the secularists are concerned about, is these lives, these souls that are lost. I mean, how tragic is that, to lose 67,000 people plus to an overdose death? Usually it's opioids, fentanyl. Those kind of drugs are mixed in, fentanyl's mixed in usually with those kinds of drugs. And people just accidentally die using too much, overdosing. And a lot of times it's hopelessness that sparks this. I think about Proverbs chapter 23, verses 19 through 21, which says, "Hear, my son, and be wise, and direct your heart in the way. Be not among drunkards or among gluttonous eaters of meat, for the drunkard and the glutton will come to poverty, and slumber will clothe them with rags." That's Proverbs 23, 19 through 21. So with the cost of drug addiction being in the hundreds of billions of dollars every year, that's healthcare, that's law enforcement, that's, imprisonment, and all the costs associated with drug addiction. We're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars, depending on where you look and what source you go to. It could be, $500 billion or so, maybe not in 1 year, but over several years. That's generally the cost. And so, but I even read somewhere where it was, I think they said about $300 billion cost that particular year. So we're talking about a very expensive problem, but the bigger deal are these souls that are lost. And, and to put it in perspective for people, more people die from accidental overdosing than in 1 year, like in 2018, than died in the entire almost 10 years of the Vietnam War. And I quote that stat a lot because I think it's just powerful to think about a 10-year war that people protested for many years as an unjust war. Why are we in that war, et cetera, et cetera. The hippie movement, everybody's familiar with that. And that kind of, that war sparked some of that debate. Well, we have more people dying every year than died in those 10 years. I just find that tragic. So now the government is trying to offer solutions, and I applaud that. I'm very grateful for the government's concern about this, their people. I'm also grateful for secular people and programs that want to help with this problem. I get it. And a lot of times what they offer is what's called medication-assisted treatment. Now, I'm going to talk specifically about methadone because that's where my knowledge is. Suboxone's another option. There are some others, but really methadone and Suboxone. Suboxone's kind of replaced methadone in some people's minds. It's more the modern one. But I worked in a methadone clinic and really enjoyed my work. It was when I was first getting started in drug addiction work. It was my second job actually working at the methadone clinic. I worked at a residential program for teenagers before that, and then I moved to the methadone clinic as a counselor and later became the program director and worked in methadone treatment place for 4 years. So I know how those programs work, and I won't talk about it publicly. I'm very grateful for that opportunity. I'm grateful for my bosses and the people that promoted me and encouraged me and trained me and gave me lots of opportunities. That's where I got my secular credential. My KDAC 2 was while I was working in methadone. And methadone at the time when I was working in the 90s, I was working in methadone treatment programs. Really, it wasn't accepted in the abstinence 12-step community. So they didn't like methadone back then, and methadone was fighting to be seen as legitimate in the 12-step abstinence-only world. So if that makes sense, I mean, methadone's a class 2, a schedule 2 narcotic with a high abuse potential because it has long-acting pain relief properties, and there's just a high physical dependence liability with methadone. And when you get off of methadone, it's very painful. There's long-standing withdrawal effects. And so just jumping off of methadone is not wise. Do not do that. If you're on methadone, you're listening right now, talk to your doctor, your clinic, and have them taper you off of that drug slowly because it is a very powerful, dangerous drug. So please see your physician, your medical doctor right away. And so methadone was a replacement drug for heroin and prescription opioids that was seen as really a viable solution to reduce the accidental overdose rate. And Suboxone is similar. It's probably a little better drug than methadone, in my opinion, but others would probably say, "Oh, I can't believe you say that. It's the other way around." Whatever. People have different opinions. But methadone, being on that clinic, working there, I just got to see firsthand really how inept the so-called solution truly is because there was no heart change. It was all at the behavioral level. And there's some benefit there, right? I only saw 2 people ever successfully detox off the program. I later heard that one of those went back to drugs and alcohol. So only one person really maintained sobriety for at least 6 months or so afterward. And that person, I remember he's a young man, he was determined to get on the methadone. He never got higher than about 30 milligrams, which a lot of people go up to 100 milligrams. So he stayed, at 30% of the max dose and then just tapered off slowly. We helped him 25, 20, 15, 5. And till eventually he got off of it and stayed off. He probably used some different drugs to help him initially get over some of the withdrawal, but his heart was to stay clean and sober, and he did it. He wasn't a Christian. He's just a young guy who was determined to do it, and he could do it. Well, the lacking of heart change is really what I see in that movement, and so I want to talk about that. Now, some of the positives with methadone, I don't want to sit here and just bash methadone. I'm thankful again to have worked on the clinic, but methadone intake, just the positive was that it's controlled by the clinic. So the person had to come into the clinic, see the nurse every day, dose in front of the nurse, which meant they would drink their bottle of medicine in front of the nurse. And then as they progressed in the program and earned some trust with us in terms of participating in counseling, in our group counseling, our individual counseling, and then also showing clean drug screens. We did urine drug screens in the clinic, at least, once every other week. 2 a month was the baseline. And they were random, so the person never knew, but they were coming to the clinic every single day. We were closed on Sunday, so they got a take home for Sunday. But after 3 months of clean drug screens and participation in counseling, the person would then graduate to what they call phase 2. And at phase 2, they would come Monday, Wednesday, Friday and get take homes for Tuesday. One on, Monday, they get a take home for Tuesday. On Wednesday, they get a take home for Thursday. And on Friday, they get 2 take homes, Saturday and Sunday, and they come back on Monday. And every time they come back, they have to bring their bottle back. And that was to try to help with diversion. So there was a sense of control and help from the clinic that I really appreciated. I mean, it was a really good attempt at behavior modification, which I think is maybe the first step in trying to help somebody. You help them to do what's right, whether they want to or not, but they're starting to put in place good practices and things that they need to do. And then the drug tests were a good deterrent. Again, drug tests are fear-based, so it motivates people with fear, like fear of getting caught. I don't want to give a dirty drug screen or a negative drug test. Positive drug tests for some illicit substance. So it kept them motivated short term. I think a better motivating factor is always love rather than fear, but fear is powerful in the beginning. And then as a medication, methadone covered up the opioid highs. So the good news there was that people on methadone were able to not use heroin and the needle, because if they tried to use heroin, shoot it into their veins, they wouldn't feel it. And it would kind of make them mad. And they would tell me, yeah, when I first got on methadone, I went home and, a few days in, I thought, I'm going to try some dope. And they'd shoot heroin in their arm, and they said, I didn't feel a thing. It didn't work. It was just like water. It was just a waste of time. And they quit, using, because it's like, well, why would I use that? It doesn't produce anything. So that, again, is a positive, and I understand that. And, again, we offered counseling, although it wasn't biblical counseling, the place I worked. It was a secular approach, a disease approach. But that's how the clinic would operate. So they'd get the take-homes, and they'd have to put those in a lockbox. They couldn't just put it in their pocket. They had to drink their dose in front of the nurse for that day. Then they had to put their take-home bottle in a lockbox, put it in the box, lock it, and go to their car, and they were supposed to immediately leave. They couldn't hang out in the parking lot, because here's the negative side of a methadone clinic. Out in the parking lot, people would trade drugs. They would deal drugs. They would sell their take-home medicine to another person who was out there who couldn't get on the clinic or didn't want to. And they would sell, back then, when I worked in the clinic, it was $1 per milligram. So if you were on 100 milligrams of methadone, you could drink your dose of 100 in front of the nurse, which was plenty to last you really 2 days, then sell your take-home bottle dose to someone for $100, which this was, 25 years ago. You'd sell your 25 years ago, $100 was worth more than it is now, but $100 to sell your dose, and you're going to be okay that day. And then you go to the clinic on Wednesday and redose at 100, and now you have a Thursday dose you can sell. And of course, when you sell it, you have to keep your bottle because you have to turn in your bottles. If you don't turn in your bottles, then the nurses didn't dose you because they just, that was the rule. You had to bring your bottle back. So people brought their bottles back. Then on Friday, well, man, you got a bonus. You got 2 take-homes, when you're in phase 2. So you drink Friday's dose. It holds you over to Saturday. You sell the Saturday dose, and you keep the Sunday dose. And people would keep it kind of in their fridge or shelf or whatever at home, and just kind of use that when they needed it. They would drink some of it. So that was the plan. Then there was even a phase 3 where you came on Mondays and Thursdays, and you got take-homes for the other days of the week. And we had a phase 4, a hardship, we would call it, where you could come once a week and get 6 take-homes. So, that's $600 worth of drugs you could sell. So that was a negative, the diversion, the selling of take-homes. The other negative from my perspective as a director of a methadone clinic was our clients could still experience highs from other drugs. So it only worked for the opioid family of drugs, your heroin, Dilaudid, morphine, oxys, those kinds of drugs were impacted by methadone. But guess what wasn't impacted? And we didn't really test for this when I first started the clinic. Our test didn't show positive for marijuana. So people could still smoke pot and take methadone and not get caught on their urine drug screens. Now, later on, they lowered the levels where we screened for urine drug screens, and the levels were lowered, so we started getting positives for marijuana. But when I first started, the test for marijuana was such a high threshold that nobody ever tested positive for marijuana. The other drugs they could use with methadone were benzodiazepines, which are very scary. That's your Xanax, Valium, that family of drugs. And those are very powerful drugs, and you mix that with methadone, you get a pretty good high from a addict's perspective. And then people used cocaine on methadone, which would almost give you a heart attack. We're talking about hardcore abusers, so their bodies were used to this, but people did what they often call speedballs, where you take an upper and a downer together, and cocaine with methadone had a very similar effect. And our medical doctor was always concerned about people taking cocaine while they're on the methadone clinic. And then amphetamines, were used and so forth. So people could feel those highs while they were on methadone. Methadone worked for opioids, but it didn't work again for heart change. So the desire to get high, you just have to change and use a different type of drug to get a high. It wasn't uncommon to have clients overdose and die while they were on that program because their physical hearts couldn't withstand the power of, say, cocaine and marijuana mixed with methadone. There were lots of overdose drug deaths. So that's my concern about this medication-assisted treatment. Yes, it's targeted for opioids, and it works in one sense to replace opioid addiction, but it doesn't work when you talk about marijuana, benzodiazepines, cocaine, amphetamines, et cetera, et cetera. So that's my major concern with medication-assisted treatment is no real heart change. And when I say heart change, I'm talking about the desire to stop using drugs completely, to be someone who is committed to sobriety and sobriety at all costs, and to live in a way that not only behaviorally you're changed, but on the outside, but you want to change, you want to grow. And of course, from our perspective, as Christians, we want to grow and be changed by the power of the Holy Spirit and God's Word working in us to make us more like Jesus Christ. And that's just not going to happen at medication-assisted treatment unless there are biblical Christian counselors that are helping the people to see that and to want that, and to taper off of the methadone to where they are eventually drug-free. Because the parallel I use, and not everybody likes this example, but the idea of purgatory, which I do not believe purgatory is a real place. I'll just tell you. I know I just offended a lot of my Catholic friends and uh, folks like that. But purgatory is a made-up idea by man. It's not in the Bible. So when people die, the Bible talks about them being asleep. They're dead. And then the Bible talks about really the two destinations. Jesus talked about this. There's heaven and there's hell. Well, there's two destinations, but this idea of purgatory is really what I think medication-assisted treatment is all about. It's in that realm of purgatory. So it's not heaven. That's freedom. That's being drug-free and living in a way that you're not tied down to methadone or any other drug. And it's not hell. You're not shooting dirty needles in your arm and spreading diseases and just living the life of an addicted person and stealing and so forth. But it's purgatory. You're in the middle. It's not heaven. It's not hell. It's this area in between. And of course, purgatory is not real, but the construct is I'm not really in hell, so I'm not hurting that way, but I'm not really in heaven either. And that's what medication-assisted treatment is from my perspective. And some people argue it is hell. And I think in many ways it certainly can be hell. So it's closer to hell than it is to heaven. So it's either hell or purgatory, but it's not heaven. And my goal, and the reason we do the addiction connection stuff that we do, all the training, all the things we're offering, and we have big plans for 2021, but all of that is we want to see Christians be more concerned with the goal of sobriety. We wanted to see them to be concerned to become like Jesus Christ because he's the only answer. And he is the higher power. He's the highest power. And he's the only God that will do. And so we want to offer him as the solution for addiction. And I love that. So when that happens, Christ can change the heart, which will then change the behaviors. It will modify the behaviors because the heart has been drastically modified and changed. And I get fired up when I start talking about that because that's where hope is. Now, could a person work at a methadone clinic and help people? Yes. I did that myself. I was a Christian trying to share the gospel where I could with willing people, but it wasn't like I was open to share it and I could share it anywhere. I had to be very discreet and careful about that. And of course, you don't want to push your religion on anybody, but you want to have the freedom to say, hey, can I tell you about Jesus? And I would, obviously, most people know that I probably push that a lot and talk to people about Jesus and was very upfront about it. But I wanted people to know so that they could ask me about it and I could tell them about it. And that happened from time to time, which was great. But overall, if I just followed the methadone program and all that it gave and didn't do my extra biblical stuff to try to reach people with the hope of the gospel in an evangelistic way, then if I just taught the program way, basically no one would ever hear the gospel. It's just maintenance, maintain. You're not giving into your disease. You're caring for it, and so forth. And so from my perspective, I don't love medication-assisted treatment. I think that methadone, Suboxone, and some of the other drugs are powerful. You can become enslaved to them, just like you can any drug, and you're becoming enslaved really to the clinic. The clinic controls a lot of what you can say or do. And it's a rough crowd to associate with, which is why I read Proverbs 23, really verses 19 through 21. But if you look at verse 20, it says, be not among drunkards. And so when you're at the clinic and you're in line waiting, you're talking to people, you're among drunkards. You're among gluttonous eaters of meat. You're among people who will come to poverty if they continue that lifestyle. And slumber will clothe them with rags. And that's the warning in the scriptures for that. So for anybody listening today, don't jump off methadone. Talk to your doctor. Taper off. Get to a place where you can experience heaven on earth, which is really being a Christian and being someone who can rest, knowing that Jesus Christ paid the penalty for your sin and that you're forgiven for every sin you've ever committed, past, present, and even in the future that you will commit. You're forgiven of that through Jesus Christ because he is the Lord, he is the Savior, and he's the one who is sufficient for transformation in this life. So I want to thank you for listening and being a part of the Addiction Connection. Pray that you would continue to support us, pray for us as we endeavor in 2021 to do what God's called us to do. Thanks for joining me today.